Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of 14 Divine Guides, a show that is dedicated to the 14 infallibles, peace and salutations upon them all. Alhamdulillah, we have managed in the last 3 weeks to look at the life and biography of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his holy family. And Insha'Allah, today we will start a new chapter, if I may say, looking at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the cousin of the Holy Prophet, the husband of Fatima al-Zahra, the daughter of the Holy Prophet, and the first Imam in the Shia Ithna Ashari school of thought. With me is Al-Haj Sajjad Jiyad, a lecturer and researcher in Islamic studies. We are honored to have him with us, and inshallah he will be with us for the next 3 weeks looking at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And we have divided this episode into 3 parts. Today inshallah we will look at some of the main, I can say, milestones or main steps of the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, from his upbringing, his birth, up until his migration with the Holy Prophet to Medina. Inshallah next week we will look at Imam Ali alayhi salam in the Quran. A lot of our viewers may say Imam Ali's name is not mentioned in the Quran. Of course, by name it is not, but there are many verses that refer to Imam Ali alayhi salam. And inshallah in the 3rd week we will look at the succession of Imam Ali to the Prophet and the Khilafat, and the reason why Imam Ali is the first Imam in the Shia school. First of all, I would like to welcome our guests. Haji Sajjad, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu.
Thank you for joining us, Haji Sajjad. And inshallah, you'll be with us for the next few weeks, looking at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Before I think we start to look at the birth of Imam Ali alayhi salam, why is it important for us to look at the life of Imam Ali in particular? And a lot of attention is paid. Obviously, inshallah, we're doing the whole infallibles, but in our community we can say a lot is looked into the life of Imam Ali. What is the reason and what are the benefits we may gain from looking at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tayyibin al-Tahirin. We send our salams to our 12th Imam, the living Imam, and inshallah we dedicate this show to him to show the world, our fellow brothers and sisters in Islam, to non-Muslims as well, our dedication to our faith, and to help explain a bit more about our devotion to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Insha'Allah, the 12th Imam is happy with our endeavors on this occasion. The reason why we dedicate so much resource and time, and even when we attend lectures, we always hear the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen through the lecture, either at the beginning or the end, even if it is commemorating Wafat Imam al-Sadiq, the birth of the Prophet. If we're talking about Imam Hussein, somehow Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen's name features in these talks and lectures. It is because of several ahadith. Firstly, that the Prophet said about Ali ibn Abi Talib, to look at his face is to look at the face of the great prophets, and he mentioned some of the great prophets by name. He says that me and Ali are brothers. We are brothers in this world and the hereafter. He says that Amir al-Mu'mineen is my wasi. If I were to tell you about his status, I worry that you would become like the followers of Jesus. You would begin to worship Ali ibn Abi Talib instead of Allah. So clearly there is commandment from the Holy Prophet for us to turn our attention towards Amir al-Mu'mineen. Secondly, it is because the schism that has occurred within the Muslim family over who is the successor to the Prophet is really essentially over the question of, was Ali the most superior of the companions? And I'm sure most of the Muslims out there, if they look at what history has recorded about him, they'll say yes, he was the most superior of all the companions. Yes, he was the most capable of all the companions. So the question then turns to, why then was he not accepted as the first Khalifa? Why then have a large chunk of the Muslims not followed Amir al-Mu'mineen as being their leader? And from Amir al-Mu'mineen we look at Al-Hasan, Al-Hussein and the rest of the Imams. So it's not a matter of the personality only. We look at the whole belief system. So to look into the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen is to understand beliefs, inshaAllah.
Ahsant, Haji. And I add to your comments that Rasulullah, peace be upon him and his holy family, has said, Ana madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha. I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its gate. And whoever wants to enter the city, they must come through the gate, of course. So inshallah we are heading towards the city of
Inshallah.
knowledge in these 3 episodes. And as you mentioned, inshallah, this show, and this is an endeavor from yourself, and inshallah we take on this endeavor to dedicate this show to the Imam of our time. May Allah hasten his reappearance. We'll start by looking at his birth. His birth was on the 13th of Rajab. It is mentioned that he was born in the Kaaba, and hence why this is one of the miracles of his birth. And tell us about this story. How did the Kaaba become the birthplace of Ali, and what makes this so special?
It is recorded by the historians that the Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen was born to Fatima bint Asad ibn Hashim. So she was the cousin of Abu Talib, whose real name was Abd Munaf, who was the son of Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib and Asad were cousins. They were brothers, both the sons of Hashim. And Fatima bint Asad was known as one of the noble ladies of Quraysh, and she had a special connection with all her children. But she said the fetus, the unborn, that was Ali ibn Abi Talib, used to talk to me and used to give me glad tidings, and I had none of this feeling with my other children, so I knew that he was special while he was in my womb. And the historians narrate that the night of the 13th of Rajab, roughly 12 years before the Prophet began his mission. That means the Prophet at the time of the birth of Amir al-Mu'mineen was around 30 years old. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, 12 years before the Bi'thah was born, that means 5 years after the Prophet was married to Khadija. And the Prophet himself was raised by Fatima bint Asad and Abu Talib. So the Holy Prophet, after the death of his father and mother and his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, was raised by Abu Talib. And he says to Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says, "Your mother is my mother. She took care of me like my mother would have, and to me she is dearer than my own mother for what she has done." And he used to say to Amir al-Mu'mineen, "I have 2 loves for you, one for yourself and one because of your father Abu Talib, who raised me. This is the reason why I love Abu Talib even more, because you're his son and because he raised me." And so Amir al-Mu'mineen's birth occurred miraculously. Fatima bint Asad says, "I felt the pains of labor. I came out and I stood before the Kaaba that my grandfathers had built, and I raised my hand in dua, and I asked that my labor be eased." She read a dua. It is recorded by some of the historians, her words. She asked that her labor pains be eased. She refers to Maryam as well in terms of the previous predecessors who also raised their hands in dua and asked that their labor pains be eased. And it is said that as she completed her dua, the walls of the Kaaba, specifically the corner of the Kaaba, began to open up, and Fatima was able to enter. She was reassured by entering the Kaaba. This was a sign. And it is said, or she narrates, that I was assisted by some women I did not know, who came to give me glad tidings and assist me with the birth of Ali ibn Abi Talib. When I looked at the face of this child, he had the signs of bravery in his face. I could tell this child was brave and courageous and special. And so in the language of the Arabs, one of the names they use to call a lion or someone who has the bravery of a lion, they call him Haydara, which is an Arabic term for extreme courage, or also a name for a lion. And so this was the name that she chose there and then. And when Abu Talib received the young infant, he says, "I was inspired to call him Ali. I was inspired to call him Ali ibn Abi Talib." And then the Prophet afterwards, hearing of the birth, came to congratulate them. When he asked, "Oh, what name you are going to call him?" they said, "We have chosen Ali for him." He says, "Yes, by Allah, this is the name I would have chosen, Ali as well." And so the Holy Prophet received this special birth while he was 30, and Amir al-Mu'mineen had just come into this world. And Abu Talib at that time had just begun to go into financial difficulties. He had 5 children, Abu Talib. He had Talib the oldest, and then Aqil, and then Ja'far, and then Ali ibn Abi Talib. It is said that he had 2 daughters. We know about one of them. The second is slightly unknown, but her name is recorded. The first is Khafita. She is the sister of Amir al-Mu'mineen named Hani. And the second is Jumana bint Abu Talib. And it is said that Hani remained with the Holy Prophet. She went on the Hijrah, but the historians have not recorded much about Jumana. So maybe 5 of these children we have details about. The 6th, as I said, Jamal, is not well known. Talib died before the Prophet began his mission, but the others remained during the Prophet's time. And Abu Talib had a very difficult period, financial difficulties. He used to cater for the orphans and the widows. He used to supply some of the pilgrims that had come to Mecca with food and basic service, and he used up all his finances in assistance of the people. And he did not leave his family like the rest of the Quraysh do and engage in trade only. He cared to actually try to raise his children, give attention to them. While the others taught their children to steal and to go out and become highway robbers and go out and invade and attack, Abu Talib dedicated his time to his children to raise them properly. When after a couple of years he realized he could not afford to even buy provisions, food for his own children, he gathered his brothers and his nephews. So he gathered the Holy Prophet, and he gathered Al-Abbas, and he gathered Hamza, and he said to them, I cannot take care of my children anymore. Who will you take so that I will be able to have less burden on me? I will keep Aqil, but you between yourselves must take one of my children each. It is said that Al-Abbas decided to take Talib, the oldest, and that Hamza took Ja'far, and the Holy Prophet said, Subhanallah, it is destined that I take Ali ibn Abi Talib. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I was raised by the Prophet. I was not raised by my father. I was raised by the Prophet. And he describes in Najj al-Balagha actually one of the instances in one of his sermons, sermon number 191, which is called Khutbah al-Qasi'ah, which is one of the verses in which he disparages against the shaitan, and he talks about how shaitan tries to come to you in different guises. Therein he talks about how he used to fight for the Muslims, and even in difficult conditions when all the Muslims were afraid of the jihad and afraid of fighting, he would come out and fight. He says, even in my boyhood I had lowered the chest of the famous men of Arabia when I was a young man, and broke the horn points, which means I defeated the chiefs of Rabi'a and Mudhar. Certainly you know my position of close kinship and special relationship with the Prophet of Allah. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and his descendants. When I was only a child, he took charge of me, referring to this incident. He used to press me to his chest and bring me close to him. He used to chew something and then feed me with it. He found no lie in my speaking, no weakness in my acts. The way today we see that baby food is mushy, it is made so that it's soft, it's easy to eat for children. Sometimes parents will even take a bite out of something, maybe bring it so that the child, break it up for them so the child will eat it. Amir al-Mu'minin says this is what the Prophet used to do. He used to act like the father to me. He used to take the food, chew it for me so that I could eat it easier. He then continues. He says, from the time of his weaning, Allah had put a mighty angel with him to take him along the path of high character and good behavior throughout day and night. While talking about the Prophet, while I used to follow him like a young camel following in the footprints of its mother. Allah. He describes 1 minute the Prophet being like a father, and then now he describes like him following the Prophet like the camel follows the mother. So the Prophet is both the father and the mother here in this description. He says the she-camel, when an animal comes to being, they always follow the mother. Even babies today, we see that they're very attached to their mother. He says, this was my position. I was raised in the household of the Prophet in this way. Every day he would show me in the form of a banner some of his high traits and commanded me to follow it. Every day, this is very important, every year he used to go in seclusion to the hill of Hira, where I saw him. I used to see him when he used to go to Ghar Hira, but no one else saw him. In those days, Islam did not exist in any house except that house of the Prophet and Khadija, while I was the third after these two. There was no one else that was a believer except us three. I used to see, and he continues with some of the description of what he used to see, used to hear. He says sometimes the footsteps of the angels when they used to approach the Prophet. So the birth of Amir al-Mu'mineen, miraculous as it was, he was destined to be brought up with the Holy Prophet.
Ahsant. It's important, I think, that you mentioned one of Imam Ali's nicknames, and that is Haidara. There are many other nicknames, inshallah, we'll try and look at. The most famous being Amir al-Mu'mineen, of course. Others being Ya'sub al-Din, Waliullah, Abu Turab, Abu al-Hasan. Let's try and look at some of these nicknames. Some of them were given to him by the Holy Prophet. It is also worth mentioning that two famous nicknames which are given to him are As-Siddiq and Al-Faruq. which are sometimes not attributed to Imam Ali, but they are from his nicknames that we know. So can we try and look at some of these nicknames and the reasons? First, I think it's important, maybe we'll look at Abu Turab, because there are different narrations as to why he was called Abu Turab. What is the reason why he was named this name? And by who was he given this title?
Exactly right. You said that several narrations. This occurred during the time of the Umayyads and later the Abbasids. Anything that was ascribed to Amir al-Mu'mineen, anything that included a commendment of Amir al-Mu'mineen, they had to turn into something that was dispraise, something that was attacking Amir al-Mu'mineen. So whenever they found a title, As-Siddiq, they tried to attribute it to someone else, not to Amir al-Mu'mineen. Al-Faruq, they attributed it to someone else, not to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Whenever there was an incident, for example, that was praiseworthy, like the marriage of Amir al-Mu'mineen to Fatima az-Zahra, there was no way that you could change this event. But instead, what did they come and say? They said that he tried to marry the daughter of Abu Jahl, and that Amir al-Mu'mineen made Fatima az-Zahra angry, and that she was angry with him and she threw him out of the house, and so on and so forth. So anytime there is praise of Amir al-Mu'mineen, there are several narrations, because unfortunately historians have tried to fabricate some of this. The incident that Amir al-Mu'mineen was called Abu Turab by, it is actually a title that the Prophet uses for him. He comes one day to Fatima az-Zahra and he says to Fatima, "Where is my brother? Where is Amir al-Mu'mineen?" She said, "He is by the shade of the mosque. He's taking some rest by the shade by the mosque." And so when the Holy Prophet had come to see Amir al-Mu'mineen, he had taken a small part of the mosque where he was in the shade, and he was lying down, and he was covered in dust because the buildings over there were very basic. And so the Holy Prophet came to him and he says, "Rise, Ya Aba Turab," and that means, "O father of the dust," if you will, someone who is covered in dust, "rise up, I will make you happy." And then he says to him, "You are going to be my brother in this life and the hereafter. You are my wasi. You are to me like Harun was to Musa." And Amir al-Mu'mineen used to love this title because the Prophet gave it to him, and the Prophet used it out of love for him. And he loved the fact that it was the most, if you will, homely kind of title. Abu Turab, the person who is always willing to be the most humble in front of people, the person who is always most attached to the basic form of sujood and turab on this earth. And later on, the Umayyads tried to use this as a point of fun. They used to avoid using the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They used to always call him Abu Turab. They did not like to call him Ali ibn Abi Talib or Amir al-Mu'mineen. They used to call him Abu Turab. One of the Prophet's wife also likewise, she used to call him Abu Turab, refusing to say Ali ibn Abi Talib or something else, believing that Abu Turab was a way of trying to make mockery of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But in fact, he liked this title very much.
Another title, I think, is Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is a famous title that we mostly use. What is the meaning of this title?
Amir al-Mu'mineen, this was a title used several times during the lifetime of the Prophet. It means the prince or the leader of the believers. And the Holy Prophet would always say that I am the best of mankind, or I am the leader of mankind. Ali ibn Abi Talib is Imam al-Muttaqeen, the Imam of the people who have taqwa, the believers. He also used to say that I am the leader of mankind. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the chief of the Arabs. Even one time one of his wives says, "How come he is the chief? You are supposed to be the chief of the Arabs." He says, "No, I am the best of the leader of mankind, but the leader of the Arabs is Ali ibn Abi Talib," because of what kind of stature he has. And the title Amir al-Mu'mineen was reconfirmed on the day of Ghadir, when the Prophet says that "Man kuntu mawla hada aliyun mawla." O people, if I am your wali, if I am your leader, Ali is your wali. It is said that the second Khalifa comes up to Amir al-Mu'mineen and congratulates him. He says to him, "Bakhin bakhin ya Ali, innaka aw bakhin bakhin ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, innaka asbahta wali wa wali al-mu'mineen wal mu'minat." You have become, congratulations O Amir al-Mu'mineen, you have become my wali and the wali of the mu'mineen and the mu'minat. So it is reconfirming in a way that the title Amir al-Mu'mineen was used in the lifetime of the Holy Prophet for Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Ahsant, Haji Sajjad. Of course, there are many others that we can go through, but due to time, of course, we'll just mention some of these kunyas that or titles that Amir al-Mu'mineen is known as. Abu al-Sibtain, which is the father of the two grandsons. Abu al-Hasan, the father of al-Hasan. Abu al-Hussein, the father of al-Hussein. And this kunya, for example, is given a lot to those who are called Ali, for example. If you're called Ali, usually you are called by Abu Hussein, or if you're called Hussein, it's vice versa, you're called Abu Ali. Abu Turab, as we mentioned, these are just some of the kunyas, titles, nicknames that are given to Imam Ali alayhi salam. As you mentioned, Haji, he was taken by the Prophet at the age of around 4. We are guessing, or we know from narrations that it was around the age of 4, and he lived with the Holy Prophet, and he used to see the Holy Prophet go to the Mount of Hira, to this cave where the Prophet used to wonder and think, and it was there that the Prophet met Jibreel for the first time. There's a title that is given to Imam Ali, which leads me to my next question, which is used a lot by the Sunni school of thought, which is Ali karramallah wajha. And this is given for a particular reason, which is that Ali, before Islam, did not worship any idols. Of course, those of you that watched the episode with the Holy Prophet noticed that we mentioned that at the time of the Holy Prophet, there was people worshipping idols. Hence why it was Imam Ali raised on the Prophet's shoulders, and when they returned after migration to destroy all these idols. This is quite important, because even though Islam was not there, and even though anyone that did worship idols before Islam and then became a Muslim, he wouldn't get punished for what he did. But this again is another character of Imam Ali, that the fact that he did not worship idols for a particular reason. What is this reason, do you think, that we have in our narrations that made Imam Ali so special that even before Islam he did not worship any idols?
2 points on this. The first is, how could Amir al-Mu'mineen have worshipped the idols if he was raised by the Holy Prophets? The Prophet himself never worshipped the idols. And Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I was given food from the mouth of the Prophet to my mouth. So it is not possible physically for Amir al-Mu'mineen to deviate from the belief of the Holy Prophet. When he was raised, he describes the Prophet as being like his father and his mother. He was raised by the Prophet in this school. So Amir al-Mu'mineen's religion was the religion of the Prophet. If the Prophet was someone who did not worship idols, Ali ibn Abi Talib was someone who did not worship idols. This is very clear to see. The second point is that Amir al-Mu'mineen, for him to be commander of the believers, for him to be successor of the Prophet, had to be of a status in which the Prophet describes this to me, you are like me, like Harun was to Musa, but there is no Prophet after me. He has to be of a stature which the Prophet could trust the entire religion with him. If Ali ibn Abi Talib was someone who, wal-'iyadhu billah, would consume alcohol, or would worship idols, or would commit the greater sins, and later he's going to be called commander of the believers, he's going to be called the successor to the Prophet, someone will stand up and say, hold on, I was not worshipping idols, why is he better than me? How can he command me? How can he be the successor to the Prophet when he was one of us who used to do what we do? There is an incident when Abdullah bin Mas'ud, when he says, I first heard about the Holy Prophet, I entered Mecca, I came out to seek some of the nobles of Quraysh, so I saw Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, so I came to him, and while we were sitting, a youngish man, he describes the Holy Prophet, says a youngish man came, his face was bright, he came, he did tawaf of the Kaaba. He did his tawaf of the Kaaba, but in a different way than we do it. He kissed the black stone, then he stood before the Kaaba in motions. He was standing 1 minute, he was bowing 1 minute, he was prostrating 1 minute. Then joined a young boy, stood to his right, and then came a veiled woman and she stood behind him, and they continued doing these actions. So I was amazed. I said to Al-Abbas, isn't this amazing? We have never seen something like this before. And Abbas says, yes, it is amazing. Do you know who that is? That is my nephew, and that is my other nephew, and that is his wife, Khadijah al-Kubra, and they are the only 3 that we know on this earth that have this religion. This is the testimony of Al-Abbas to Abdullah bin Mas'ud, saying, and there is some other companions, one called Afif, who also says, I noticed this. He says they are the only 3 with this religion. That means they had this religion for a while. Not today, not yesterday. They're the only 3 with this religion for a while. Amir al-Mu'mineen also testifies. He says, I used to hear the angels when they used to approach the Prophet, and the Prophet was engaged in discussion before he was given permission to open the da'wah, before he was told to proclaimed the prophethood openly and the beginning of his mission openly. So this shows you that the status of Amir al-Mu'minin is that he was raised in the house of Nubuwwah so that he would be of a particular stature and able to continue the successorship to the Nubuwwah by being someone who never faced the idols. That is why our Sunni brothers say, Karamallah wajha, may Allah elevate his face or honor his face, because it has never faced the idols, it never stood before the idols. This is what the title actually means.
Ahsant Haji. Inshallah, we'll be going for a short break. I did not manage at the beginning of the episode to mention for further reading, and I'll ask Haji Sajjad to also recommend one or two books. The books that I will recommend for further reading onto the life of Imam Ali. The first is The Life of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib by Al-Allama Baqir Sharif Al-Qarashi. Of course, he's done a whole encyclopedia of the 14 infallibles, so you can get any of the infallibles starting with the Holy Prophet up until Imam al-Mahdi. These books have all been translated into English, and of course the famous book Kitab al-Irshad by Sheikh al-Mufid, which is also translated into English on the life of Imam Ali. Any books that we can recommend our viewers, inshallah, to read upon if they want to look at the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam?
For the early life of Amir, which coincides with obviously the life of the Prophet, Hayat al-Qulub by Allama al-Majlisi is very interesting, includes a lot of narrations, and it's very detailed as well. For the later life of Amir al-Mu'minin, we should look at Sharh Nahj al-Balagha, which is by Ibn Abi al-Hadid. Unfortunately, I don't think it's available in English at the moment.
Thank you very much, Haji Sajjad. Inshallah, we will be going for a short break, and you can join us in a couple of minutes. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to 14 Divine Guides. I am delighted to be joined by Al-Hajj Sajjad Jiyad. If you've just joined us, we are looking at the life and biography of Imam Ali, peace and salutations be upon him. And we are at a stage where inshallah we will look at his early life. And the Prophet at the age of 40 received his first message from revelation from the angel Jibreel, and Imam Ali of course lived in the house of the Prophet. How did Imam Ali alayhi salam take the news that the Prophet announced that he was now a prophet, he was a messenger of Allah, knowing that even the first few years this message was a secret? It was very secretive. It wasn't announced to the community. And what was the role played, we can say, by Ali ibn Abi Talib, peace be upon him, in these first few years that the message was kept in the house of the Prophet, in the house of a few believers, and the fact that he was, and we touched on this in the first part, for the viewers maybe joining, we can touch on it again. He was the first male to believe in the Holy Prophet.
Our esteemed ulama that have looked at the biography of the Prophet mentioned that when he received the revelation and the responsibility that lay upon his shoulder of now preaching the religion. So previously he had his faith for himself, now he was told that this belief of yours needs to go out to the rest of the people. So the responsibility of prophethood now lay heavily on him. When he came out of Ghar Hira after receiving this revelation, it is said that the Prophet came out in a state where he was under, you might say it's stress, but he felt the burden of responsibility of the prophethood. Amir al-Mu'minin, as we've described in khutbah number 191, in sermon number 191, in khutbah al-Qas'a, he says that I used to see the Prophet when no one used to see him. I used to wait outside Ghar Hira when he used to go there. And this is one of these incidences. The Prophet entered Ghar Hira, Amir al-Mu'minin would be waiting, he would be watching for the Prophet. When the Prophet had came back in the state that he was in that condition, Amir al-Mu'minin came up to him and inquired, what is it? What, you seem to have something. And the Prophet says to him, I have received the revelation and I have been commanded to begin preaching this religion. And Amir al-Mu'minin says, I immediately said to the Prophet, I will become one of the first people to believe in you. And so in our belief, the ulama say that the first person, male or female, young or old, the first person to believe in the Holy Prophet, to join the Holy Prophet, was Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib sallallahu alayhi. At that moment, Ali ibn Abi Talib says, when I said that, I heard a loud screaming voice. So I said to the Holy Prophet, what is this sound that I can hear? And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ajib, you heard it too? And I said, yes. He said, you hear what I hear, but you do not see what I see, because I am a prophet and you are not. That was the sound of a shaitan who is in despair because I have been announced to begin my message. My revelation is open to all. And Amir al-Mu'mineen returns with the Prophet back to the house of the Prophet, in which Amir al-Mu'mineen was living in at the time, and Khadija was the second person to join in this religion of theirs. And from there on, the mission began to spread to very select people that the Prophet believed would accept Islam readily. And Abu Talib, who was the Prophet's uncle and protector, was very keen that the Prophet was very selective about who he brought towards the mission. Because when the Prophet was young and he was in the care of Abu Talib, the Prophet was no younger than maybe 15 or 16, some of the narrations say 14. He went on a trade journey with the Holy Prophet to Sham, so modern area around Damascus. And while they were there, they stopped at a resting place. A Christian monk observed the signs that the Prophet was in. His name is Bahira or Bahira. And he came out to Abu Talib and he said, who is this? He said, he is my son. He said, no. This person, his parents are dead. He said, yes, he is my nephew. He said, I beseech you to take him back and keep an eye on him. Leave this trade journey of yours, even if you make losses, because if the people find out who this man is, surely they will kill him. And Abu Talib after that understood that this person was going to be the Prophet, the final savior of mankind, and that he should watch over him. And so when the Prophet began his mission, he commanded Aqil and commanded Ali and Ja'far to always protect the Prophet and be around him. He used to say to them, or say to Aqil and to Ja'far and to Ali, Sil Jalah ibn Ammik. You always stay next to the side of your cousin. Stay right by him. Wallah, if the Quraysh get a chance, they will take him from us. So the Prophet began his mission in secret, and Amir al-Mu'mineen's role was protector at that young age. At the age when he was maybe 15 years old, very young age, he was already the protector of the Holy Prophet.
Ahsan Haji Sajjad, you mentioned a very important phrase there, that he protected the Holy Prophet, and we know of Abu Talib's protection for the Holy Prophet, and I think it is only wise that we spend a few minutes looking at the role of Abu Talib, even though if you did see a few of the previous episodes, we did mention Abu Talib's role, but it is only our duty to mention the father of Imam Ali alayhi salam and his role in spreading this message. Of course, after the message was announced, we know that Quraysh were defiant in believing in this religion, one, and two, not only did they not want to believe in it, they wanted to stop the spread of this religion. And Abu Talib was a man that was respected within Quraysh, within Mecca, and he stood firm protecting the Holy Prophet till he died, till he passed away. And that year was known as Aam al-Huzn, the year of sadness. The Prophet was very upset, and it's, I think, important to mention that if Abu Talib had not believed in the religion of Islam, he wouldn't have protected it so much and put his life at risk, even though a lot of the times we mentioned that Imam Ali sacrificed himself for the Holy Prophet, as we will do inshallah in the next part. What was the role that was so important, I think, that was played by Abu Talib in protecting the message and the messenger of Allah, Muhammad, peace be upon him?
Well, firstly, Abu Talib was, as we said, the adoptive father of the Holy Prophet. So after the death of Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather, Abu Talib was the one that took the Holy Prophet in, and he raised him until he reached the age of where he was able to be married. and he taught him many things, and he took care of him. He kept a watchful eye. There was one time the Prophet had arranged to meet someone, but they met on the outskirts of Mecca in the middle of the day. It was very hot. The Prophet, agreed to the meeting. The man forgot to turn up to the meeting, but the Prophet, of course, being a man of his word, was there, and he remained all day and all night. As I said, Abu Talib came out, he was very much afraid for where the Prophet was. He took out a whole search party. He got the whole of people of Mecca to start looking until they found the Prophet sitting outside waiting. They said, why are you here? He said, because I gave my word to meet this man. I did not wish to break my word and leave, because otherwise he would come and not find me, and I did not wish to be someone who did not keep his word. So Abu Talib grew very much attached to the Prophet and was very fearful for him because of the messages that he received that this person would be the savior of mankind. And Abdul Muttalib on his deathbed said to Abu Talib, he says, you watch over him. This one is going to be the special one from our family. So Abu Talib knew the status of the Holy Prophet. When the issue of marriage came up, the proposal of Khadijah was accepted. Abu Talib himself was the person that went on behalf of the Prophet to complete the khutbah stage, and he was the one that recited the nikah. And we know, of course, that the nikah is a legal formula. It is something that can only be recited by the wife or her wakil, and only can be accepted by the husband or his wakil. So it cannot be done by any old minister. It can't be done by anyone. It has to be either the person in question or their representative who they approve of in the meeting. And of course, the Holy Prophet is a Muslim man. Khadijah accepted Islam right away at that time when the Prophet was a believer himself. And Abu Talib could not have recited the nikah if he were not himself a believer in the Holy Prophet. The Prophet would not have been able to put him in such a position. And Fatima bint Asad, the mother of Amir al-Mu'minin, was also a believer. She would not have been allowed to remain married to Abu Talib if Abu Talib was himself not a believer. Abu Talib, as we mentioned, commanded his sons to always stay by the side of their cousin the Prophet and to protect him. And when the mission began and the Quraysh began to make trouble for the Holy Prophet, they used to come to Abu Talib. While Abu Talib was alive, the Quraysh could not attack the Prophet directly. They would make trouble for him, but they would not be able to attack him physically because they were afraid of the reputation of Abu Talib and the strength that Abu Talib commanded amongst the Arabs in Mecca and outside Mecca. So they would come to complain to Abu Talib. Your cousin, your nephew, أفسد شباننا, شتم آلهتنا. He attacks our gods. He has taken some of our youths, corrupted their minds. سفح أحلامنا. He has changed the whole environment that we live in. Do something about this. And Abu Talib would hear from them, and he would nod and say, I will speak with him. But he would go to the Holy Prophet and say, go my son, go and preach. Do not worry about these old men. Go and do what you are commanded to do. Leave them to me, I will deal with them. This was the situation of Abu Talib. He would try to take their enmity, and he would leave it with himself and tell the Prophet, go. Don't worry about what they say. You go and preach. You go ahead. And this is exactly the role that we would expect someone like Abu Talib, who has recognized that his nephew would be the Prophet, to act in. And when the situation became more difficult, they decided to organize a boycott of the believers of the Holy Prophet and even the Banu Hashim. And so there was a document that was written up declaring that no one will buy or sell from the Muslims. No one will marry to or marry from the Muslims. No one will give them food or drink. No one will talk to them. If they live or occupy a land or whatever on lease, they will give it back. The landlords will take it back from them. They will not lease any property out. If a Muslim is a neighbor to a non-Muslim, the non-Muslim must try to somehow get the Muslim out of that house, to bring a non-Muslim in there, to buy it from him, whatever necessary to get the Muslim out, so they would have no place to live. They would not sell them any property, and so on and so on. They continued. So the conditions became very difficult for the Muslims. Imagine a boycott like this on a small community within a city, very difficult to defend against. And so Abu Talib said to the Prophet, do not worry, we will go to a place that I have built for such difficult situations. It is called Sha'b Abi Talib. In a way, the fortress or the cave that belongs to Abu Talib. It was said to be very basic, but it would guard against the elements, and intruders in case someone wanted to attack. This is where Abu Talib was able to protect the Muslims. They were very few in number, maybe 150, maybe 200 Muslims, mostly the weak and the poor people, not people who were very wealthy and very capable. And Abu Talib for 2 years and 10 months kept the Muslims protected in this place, the Sha'b of Abu Talib. And until that time, then Allah sent some of these worms that ate at this document until they reached the words, Bismika Allahumma. And that was the only thing that remained. And when the Quraysh saw this, they decided to end the boycott. So Abu Talib played that role of protector to the Holy Prophet. And the Quraysh, while Abu Talib was alive, were not able to attack the Prophet directly. So they tried to make accusations. He is Sahirin wa Majnoon, he is a sorcerer, he is a madman, and so on, attack his followers. They were forced, some of them, to go to Abyssinia, Al-Habasha. So Ja'far, the son of Abu Talib, led the Muslims to the first hijrah to Abyssinia, to Al-Habasha, modern day Ethiopia, because they suffered so much. This was the first hijrah of the Muslims before the second hijrah that we will talk about it eventually. Abu Talib supported all these movements. So he sacrificed his son Ja'far for this, and his son Ali ibn Abi Talib was always with the Prophet, and his son Aqil was always keeping an eye on the rest of the Qurayshis. So the house of Abu Talib gave everything that they could for the mission of the Holy Prophet.
You mentioned something very important, I think, for the viewers also to understand, is that during while Abu Talib was still alive, Quraysh did not dare to try and threaten to kill the Prophet. It was only after Abu Talib had passed away that the first attack was done to kill the Prophet, and that of course was when Imam Ali stayed in the bed of the Prophet. So Abu Talib was not alive. So out of respect and fear, because of Abu Talib's position, because he was from a well-known family, they could not attack the Prophet. But it was only after Abu Talib had passed away that they tried to attack and kill the Prophet. Just going back a few steps, and the announcement of the Prophet to Quraysh, and this I think is a famous story that inshallah we'll stop at, where he invited all his family members to announce that he was a prophet and that he was a messenger, and he has a message for us, for them. What was this story? And this also I think is the first we can say narration that the Prophet tells them that Imam Ali will be my successor.
Since this is in reaction to the commandments from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the Holy Prophet, that you begin your da'wah openly now. No more secret invitation. Now openly invite every Muslim to the mission, which occurred some 2 years and some months after initial mission began. The Prophet was told, now open it up. Be public, be open, go and stand by the Holy Kaaba and invite people to Islam. And the first people that you should invite are your relatives, because they are the closest to you. أَقْرَبُونَ أَوْلَى بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And so the verse that is revealed says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَانْذِرْ عَشِيرَتِكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, and invite your nearest kin, your nearest relatives to this da'wah, to this message. And so the Holy Prophet, Amir al-Mu'mineen describes, he says, the Holy Prophet one day called me to him, and he said to me, go and prepare the ingredients for a meal. We will bring a leg of a lamb, so enough to feed maybe four men, 3 men, 2 men, a small amount of lamb, and bring me some milk and prepare, and I will be involved in the cooking myself, and go and invite the family of Abdul Muttalib and Abd Munaf, so the greater house of the Banu Hashim, some 40 men roughly. He gave him his list of the various uncles, Abu Lahab included, and the rest of them, and in cousins, and he said, go and invite them to a meal. I will organize a meal at our house. And then when he says, I went and invited all our uncles and our cousins, they all came, and I saw the Prophet himself. He began to cook the leg of the lamb, the meal itself, and I saw him take some of the meat and begin to prepare it with his own hand and recite while he was doing this. And he said, I will prepare the meal. You help me, but I will make the meal myself. He prepared it with his own hands. And then likewise, he took the milk and he began to stir it and prepare it with his own hands himself. And I said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, or I said to the Holy Prophet, there are all of them here today, in a way trying to tell the Prophet that this food is not enough to feed all of these men. He said to me, Ya Ali, take whatever I give you, you go and give them. You take from me and go and feed them. And Amir al-Mu'minin says, when they were all sat and the meal began, I used to take some of this lamb. What the amount that I had, each one of them ate exactly that amount. The total amount that I had, each one of them ate that. So I had, let's say, food for one man. All of them ate this food for one man. So there should have been 40 shares at least. But I only had one share. But all of them ate at least one share. So technically, this food should not be enough. Likewise, the milk, I served each one what the total amount there is. So they should have finished it. He says, by the blessings of the Holy Prophet and his hands and what he was reciting, they ate, the food was wonderful, and it looked as if the leg of the lamb was not touched. And it looked as if not one drop of this milk had been taken. The Prophet, seeing that they were content, was stood up, about to begin. Abu Lahab, the cursed, had sensed that the Prophet was going to say something. He understood what he was trying to do. He said to everyone that was gathered, haven't you seen how our nephew, our brother has put a magic on this, a spell on this, and look at this food, it's as if we haven't eaten from it, let us leave. And he managed to get everyone out of the house. And the Prophet then took me, Ali says, and said to me, we will do the same again tomorrow. I must speak to them. So again we prepared the food, and again I invited them and they came. And this time the Prophet chose an earlier time and stood up and began to call people. He said, I have brought to you the best thing that the Arabs could have. I have brought you salvation thereafter. You are in the most envious position, that you are the first people to know about this. I am bringing you a treasure. And so they were very much in anticipation. And he says to them, I am bringing you Islam. I wish for you to become Muslims. I wish for you to join me. As a reward, which of you will be the first to accept, stands up and say, I accept the Muslims, will become my successor and my wali, the first of the Muslims who is the guardian over them, and will be the first of the khulafa after me. And it is said that all of them kept quiet and nobody said anything. So Amir al-Mu'minin says, I stood and I said, Ya Rasulullah, I will join you. I will be the first to believe in you. And so Amir al-Mu'minin says, I stood by the Prophet. He raised my hand and he said, this is my successor. Amir al-Mu'minin says, I was a young boy at the time, not more than 14 years old. He said to them, this is my successor. He is my leader after you. You should listen to him and obey him. Abu Lahab begins to make mockery and says to the Abu Talib that, oh, look at your situation now. You have been commanded to obey your son. This little boy of yours is now your leader. You have to obey him. And so on. The Ashira, the near kin of the Prophet, dissipated in this way. But that was the first instance in which Amir al-Mu'minin was confirmed as the successor of the Holy Prophet.
Ahsant. There are many occasions, I think, that Imam Ali was the first to put his hand. Inshallah, we'll look at these in the third part, and that is at the Battle of Khaybar, for example. The Battle of Ahzab, or known as Khandaq. Before we go to a break, inshallah, just a few characteristics of Imam Ali, inshallah, if we can look at. And I think two very important ones are that of his justice. The justice of Ali is something that is always mentioned. And another, his generosity and his kindness to the poor. If we can mention two or a few stories about his justice, Imam Ali's justice.
Amir al-Mu'minin himself was a generous man, but he never took advantage of his position, whether to be generous to others or to himself or to anyone. He used to have 2 candles at home. When he was acting in the capacity of Khalif of the Muslims, Amir al-Mu'minin, he would have 1 candle that is paid for by Bayt al-Mal, the public treasury. Whenever he had a friend or some family member came to talk to him as Ali, not as leader of the Muslims, he would turn off this candle and turn on the other candle that he had paid for himself. And one of his guests came this way and he said, what are you doing? He said, this candle is paid for the public treasury because I'm doing my work. This candle is paid for myself because I am doing personal duties. To this point, a candle is not worth anything at all, really. But to this point, he was very just with himself, how he behaved. When this guest sat down, Amir al-Mu'minin called Qambar, his servant, and he said to him, bring my guest some food. And so nice food was made for this guest, and he says, I received a very nice dish of food. I was preparing to eat with the Amir al-Mu'mineen. I said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, where's your food? He said, mine is special as well. Qambar bought a sack, this man says, and it had a lock on it. And so I thought in there must be some very special type of food. And Amir al-Mu'mineen slowly undid the lock and opened up the sack and brought out hard and stale kind of, very hard kind of bread. Flatbread, very stale and very hard. I was shocked, and I saw Amir al-Mu'mineen begin to eat a little bit of it. It was so hard it would break in his teeth. So he took some water and dipped the bread in the water so it would soften a little bit, that he would be able to eat it. So I was astounded. I said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I thought in the sack was special type of food. Why have you put a lock on this? Why have you hidden it and asked Qambar to bring it out? No, even the poor person on the street who has nothing to eat would not touch this, would not eat it. What are you afraid of? Who is going to steal it from you? He began to smile. He says, no, Ali, my sons Al-Hassan and Hussein, because they wish better for me, they would try to take it and put something on it, like honey or a little bit of butter, to try to sweeten it for me. And I do not wish for them to do that. I want to eat like the poorest person eats. This is some aspect of justice, that you behave as the least member of society expects, in terms of what he has, what he's able to afford, what he's able to do. One time, one of the people of Medina accused Amir al-Mu'mineen of being a thief. He said that he took this camel of mine, belongs to me. This person was a non-Muslim, he was apparently a Jew. And so the judge began to hold the court and called forward the person, and then called forward, and he said, Ya Abul Hassan, you come forward. Amir al-Mu'mineen, his face immediately showed anger. And the judge said, have I done something wrong? What is the issue? He said, Ya Shurayh was the Qadi. He said, Ya Shurayh, you used that man's name. No special titles, no respect. You called me Abul Hassan. Immediately you have shown me more respect and shown that you lean towards me already. You haven't heard our stories. So I'm angry because already you've started with injustice towards this man. It is said that man was astounded. He said, Ajib, I know I have accused you of wrong thing. I know you haven't taken it. You know that too. We both know the truth. We're in this court. Easily you could command him to do what you want, yet you tell him to not use the special title out of justice. He says, Wallah, this is the correct religion. He became Muslim because of this. This is the justice of Mu'mineen. When his brother Aqil comes to him and he says, I need some money, will you give me some from Bayt al-Mal? And Amir al-Mu'mineen says, well, down there are some merchants. To summarize the story, there are some merchants down there. I can't give you from Bayt al-Mal because it's not for me to give, but go and steal from those merchants. At least one of them will have enough money for what you need. He said, Ajib, I'll come for you to help you. Tell me to steal. He says, to steal from one person is better than to steal from all of the Muslims. He tries to make Aqil think that actually he can't do any special favors for anybody. So Amir al-Mu'mineen is just with everybody. When he goes into battle, he says, do not chase the person who runs away. Do not attack the elderly. Spare the women and the children. Anyone who wishes to surrender, accept. Before we begin the fight, ask, will they submit? Do they want to surrender? Will they join our beliefs and our path? Before we get into the battle. When the battle of the camel ends and he sees his companions, the ones who fought with him during the lifetime of the Prophet, fallen, he sits by them and begins to weep. He's very much upset. And he goes and sees that house in which the wife of the Prophet is. He says, Wallah, they have been unjust to you to take you out of the war. He doesn't say, you're a troublemaker. He says, you've been put in a bad situation. Go back. So this is some of the characteristics of Amir al-Mu'mineen.
Ahsant, Haji Sajjad. Inshallah, we'll be going for another short break. Join me in a few minutes. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to 14 Divine Guides. We are looking at the life of the Commander of Faithfuls, Imam Ali alayhi salam, peace be upon him. And inshallah in this third part we will look at his unmatched heroism, his strength, bravery, and the sacrifice he made towards the religion of Islam. And inshallah we'll try and look at some of these events in details because they are, we can take them as example. We'll start off inshallah, and some of these of course are mentioned in the Holy Quran, some of these events. The first ومن الناس من يشري نفسه ابتغاء مرضات الله. And that is when Imam Ali was asked by the Holy Prophet to stay in the bed that he sleeps in for the protection of the Holy Prophet. The first question, I think, if anyone asks me to stay in their place because of to save their life, the first question I will ask is, will I be okay? But the question that is asked by Imam Ali is, will you be okay? And he tells this to the Prophet. And not only does that show his sacrifice for this religion, but his love for the Prophet. He had this enormous love for the Holy Prophet, as we mentioned in the first part, because it was the Prophet that was his father figure, and he was brought up in the house of the Prophet. The incident of staying in the bed of the Holy Prophet, if you can give us some details on that, Haji.
Insha'Allah, the Prophet, while Abu Talib was alive, was in his protection. As we said, the Quraysh would not dare to attack the Prophet directly. They tried many times to poison him, assassinate him in a discreet way, but not openly to try to kill the Prophet. And so they used to even tell the children to go and attack the Prophet with stones to try to stop him from preaching. I mean, when he used to chase the children away, the wife of Abu Lahab used to come out and throw the entrails, which is the insides, the digestive organs of the animals after their slaughter, to throw that on the Prophet so that she would make the Prophet filthy and with blood from head to toe. And he would go back home and Fatima Zahra and Khadija would tend to him. And so on and so forth. This is what the methods of the Quraysh were. The first person that died was his wife Khadija, and 3 days later his uncle Abu Talib died, and he was informed, لَقَدْ مَاتَ نَاصِرُكَ, your supporter, the chief supporter that you have, has died, you must leave. He is informed by the Archangel Jibreel that you must leave, you are not safe anymore. And it is said that very night there is a meeting at Dar al-Nadwa, which is the chief meeting place of the Qurayshis, and they said, well, Abu Talib has died, surely now is the time that we can do something to Muhammad. It is said an old man appears and gives them a piece of advice, and narrators say it is possibly the shaitan himself. He says to them, one way to get yourself in a very strong position is to take a man from each clan, each house of Quraysh, to attack the Prophet at the same time, to kill him at the same time, so that when they say who killed him, it is not one house or one person or one tribe, and so the Banu Hashim will not be able to stand up to you, and his death will be forgotten in that way. Abu Jahl says, this is what we will do. Abu Lahab agrees to this, and he says, we'll do it at Fajr so that no one will see us, the women are asleep and there is no noise, and so on. The Holy Prophet is informed by Jibreel that you must leave now, and he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, I have been commanded to leave and keep someone from me in my place. At the end of the day, I need to be represented here. Someone from me needs to remain in my place in Mecca, not just in my bed. Someone needs to remain in Mecca itself, someone who represents me. And of course, there is no one else but Ali ibn Abi Talib that represents the Prophet. And as you said, I mean, when he asks, will you be okay? And the Prophet says yes, then he says, then it is my happiness, and it does not matter what happened to me as long as you are safe. The Prophet leaves Mecca without taking anything else with him. And I mean, when he says, I took his cloak to disguise myself and I stayed in his bed, they came through the door around the Fajr time, and they thought it was the Prophet, so I came out of the bed, I removed the cloak, and they were surprised to see me. They said to me, where is Muhammad? I said, I was not told to be a guard over him, to watch where he's going, where he's coming. So they became angry, you must tell us where he is. I refused. One of them came towards me, and so I killed him there and then, and the rest of them retreated when they saw this. And the next morning I received message from the Prophet that bring the Fawatim and discharge the trusts. The Prophet from a young age, he was known as a Sadiq al-Amin, the truthful and the trustworthy. In a way, he was the bank of Mecca. When the people would leave Mecca to go to travel, they would take their money and give it with the Prophet to trust him with it, because they would not trust their brothers or their sisters or their family members. They would only trust the Prophet because he was known to be trustworthy. And so the Prophet, even at this time when he was a Muslim, even though some of the Qurayshis wanted to kill him, they would still trust him with their wealth, because they knew there was no one else more trustworthy than him. And so he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen, bring the Fawatim, which is the three Fatimas, Fatima bint Asad, Amir al-Mu'mineen's mother, Fatima bint al-Hamza, which is the daughter of Hamza, and Fatima bint Muhammad, Fatima al-Zahra. It says, bring these three. I'm trusting you with the most precious women in my life. These three women, bring them with you, and give back the trusts. So the next morning, Amir al-Mu'mineen comes and stands near the Kaaba, outside Masjid al-Haram. He says, these are the trusts that you have given to Muhammad. Whoever has something, come and collect it. He finishes giving out the trusts. He then comes towards the Quraysh, who was sitting opposite one of the corners of the Kaaba. And he says, I am leaving Mecca. I am going to join the Prophets. I am taking with me the Fawatim. Know that I am not one of the people that did the hijrah privately, the people that went to Abyssinia or the people that left at night. I am doing it in front of all of you. Know that I am Ali ibn Abi Talib. I am beginning my departure. Whoever wants to suffer will come out and chase me. Otherwise, stay behind. And so Ali ibn Abi Talib left in full confidence in this manner. Abu Jahl turns around at the Quraysh and says, look, this man has embarrassed you. He is the youngest nephew that we have, but he's standing in front of us and taunting us in this way, that who dares to come after me? We must do something about this situation. So they decided to gather some 40 or 60 men, and they began to chase after Amir al-Mu'mineen into the outskirts of Mecca, into the deserts. Amir al-Mu'mineen sees a dust cloud, and he says, this is some of the Quraysh must be coming after me. He says to the women, don't be afraid, wait a second. He turns around, Abu Jahl comes out to him, and he says, you must give us back the three women. You're not allowed to take them towards Muhammad. We're not allowing you to leave. He says, you're not allowing to leave? You can't stop me. One of Abu Jahl's servants, his name is Al-Muhalla. He's one of the people who was known to be a good fighter and whatnot, came towards Amir al-Mu'mineen, immediately killed him, there and then in his place. Abu Jahl's tone changed. He said, oh, you are a nephew, you are a cousin, please, you embarrassed us in front of everyone, why don't you come back? At least publicly you look like you come back, and in the night you can leave. Don't embarrass us in front of everyone. Amir al-Mu'mineen refused and carried on and met with the Prophet in Masjid Quba, which is known today, and then entered Medina together. So this was the incident of the hijrah of the Holy Prophet. And
very important that you mentioned the Holy Prophet actually waited for Imam Ali in Quba before entering Medina, and he entered Medina with Imam Ali. Then there was the incident of the brotherhood between the Muhajirun and the Ansar, the people that had come from Mecca and the people that were living in Medina, and the Prophet chose Imam Ali as his brother. The incident of the mosque and the building of the houses around the mosque, and the ordering of the Prophet that all doors must be closed except the door of Ali. We will stop at the marriage of Fatima al-Zahra if possible, and the story of this proposal by Imam Ali alayhi salam, because it's quite an interesting story to hear, especially for those that are willing to get married now, and for the fathers that have daughters that are looking for the correct husbands for their daughters. The marriage of Fatima al-Zahra salamullahi alayha to Imam Ali.
Salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. Amir al-Mu'mineen's contribution to Islam was well known. And after the Battle of Badr, the Muslims had by then exhausted, all of the leaders had exhausted every single suitor to Fatima al-Zahra. The Khulafa, the other famous companions, all of the names that you could possibly think of went to the Prophet to ask him for the hand of Fatima al-Zahra. And he said, I do not choose, it is from Allah. I am commanded by Allah to choose the right person. None of you are acceptable in the eyes of Allah. And this led to a little bit of animosity and hatred towards the Prophet, and later on jealousy towards Amir al-Mu'mineen. And so some of the companions with good intentions said to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Ali, you can see that the Prophet has turned down every single person that has approached Fatima for marriage. There's really nobody left. Everybody that wants to get married has approached for Fatima, and all of them being turned down. You're the only real person, candidate left. And we are sure your position with the Prophet, you're close to him, your cousin, we are sure that if you asked, he will approve. Why don't you go? Why haven't you made a proposal so far? And when he says, because of the shyness that I have to go and ask something from Rasulullah. I can't stand before him and ask something from him. I'm so shy to do so. This great figure, this great person, I'm very shy to go to him and want to take something from him. I'm not in such a position. Additionally, I'm not in a position like the other men. Some of them are well off, some of them are rich, some of them have positions and so on. I have nothing to go. What kind of embarrassment will I be in if I stand before the Prophet in this way? The companions very much pushed Amir al-Mu'mineen to go and make the khutbah. And so it says that Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I went to the house of the Prophet on a day. This was after the Battle of Badr. The marriage of Amir al-Mu'mineen happened after the Battle of Badr, before the Battle of Uhud. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, I went to the house of the Prophet and my forehead is pouring with sweat. This is the man who the poets say that he is the person who cries in the mihrab, but in the battlefield he's smiling because he's at home in the battle. He has no problem, no fear. Yet he says, I'm going to the house of the Prophet and my forehead is pouring with sweat. So I sat before the Prophet like the child sits in front of its mother. The Prophet, look at the modesty and look at the greatness of the Prophet. He does not tell Ali, what do you want? What are you here for? Bring so-and-so, go and call so-and-so before you come and talk to me. He says, Ya Ali, I know what you have come for. He doesn't want to make Amir al-Mu'mineen, begin his speech and put him in a difficult position. He doesn't even want Amir al-Mu'mineen to ask because he wants to protect his modesty and his stature as much as possible. He says, Ya Ali, I know what you have come for. And it only requires that you ask so that we will agree. And Amir says, Bala, I have come for the hand of Fatima al-Zahra. And the Prophet begins to smile and he says, Ya Ali, Anifan, just now, Jibreel was with me. Just before you entered, subhanAllah, Jibreel was with me. And he asked me, he commanded me, he said to me, Zawwij al-Noor min al-Noor. Wed the Noor to the Noor. I said, Men min man, who, which Noor to which Noor? He said, Ali to Fatima al-Zahra. That was just now, and now you have come, so this is what is. I know this is the command of Allah, it's the wish of Allah. Let us ask Fatima al-Zahra, because at the end of the day, everything has to be done in a Shari'i way. Everything needs somebody's free will. We can't force people into anything, neither religion nor marriage or anything else. So today, if anyone is forced into marriage, inshallah, we tell them, this is not the way of the Holy Prophet. This is not the sunnah of the Holy Prophet. The Holy Prophet says, this is what Allah wishes, this is what Ali ibn Abi Talib wishes, this is what I wish. But
we still ask
Fatima al-Zahra needs to say what her wishes are. So he goes to Fatima al-Zahra, he says, know that Jibreel has commanded me to marry you to Ali, and Ali is in our house asking for your hand. What do you wish? And you know his position with us, you know what he has done for Islam, what he has done for us, you know what we think of him. It is said that Fatima al-Zahra, out of shyness, said nothing. She did not wish to say, yes, I want to get married and run off with this man, as unfortunately some of the stories we hear about today, some brothers and sisters going against the wishes of their parents, and they marry whoever they wish and do not involve the parents in anything. Inshallah, we don't want to get these kind of stages. We look at the behavior of the Amir al-Mu'mineen and Fatima al-Zahra and the Holy Prophet. Out of shyness, she didn't know what to say. Yeah, I want to get married and leave the house right away. She said nothing. Sukutuha ridaha, says the Holy Prophet. Because she's so shy, her silence is her acceptance. In all previous times, the Prophet would always ask her and she would always say no in a very soft voice. This time she said nothing, which means it is her acceptance. And so the Holy Prophet returned to Amir al-Mu'mineen and said, Fatima has accepted. Tell me, what do you have? Amir al-Mu'mineen did not have a house, did not have a job, did not have any savings, did not have money in a bank account, did not have a Mercedes or a BMW, did not work as a banker, did not have an ISA or tons of credit cards, did not bring his bank statement to the Prophet's house. None of the things that unfortunately some of the stories we hear today. He came to the Prophet, he said, Ya Rasulullah, you know my position, I have my shield and my sword. The Prophet said, your sword,
you fight with
we need it, it helps us. Your shield, I think you can do away with that. So on this point, he says, your shield, I think we can do something with this. Ya Salman, he calls Salman, Ta'a, calls for Salman. He says, take the shield, go to the market, say that this is the shield of Ali ibn Abi Talib. See what worth we can get for this. Salman comes back with 500 dinars, which is the mahar that is acceptable today. This is the sunnah of the Prophet, the 500 dinar. It's a small amount when we translate it into pounds. It's a very small amount. It's maybe a few £100, certainly not the tens of thousands of pounds. This was the mahar of Fatima al-Zahra, shield of Ali ibn Abi Talib, not more than that. And the Prophet takes this mahar now of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he says to him, house, I will build a house for you. Which father-in-law says this to his prospective son-in-law? That I will build a house for you. He says, I will build a house for you. And this was the house that was attached to the mosque. This was the house of Fatima, the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, that the Prophet built for Fatima and Amir al-Mu'mineen. Secondly, he says, here is the mahar. Salman, go and buy so-and-so for Fatima al-Zahra. Go and tell one of my wives to buy so-and-so, some clothes, some perfume for Fatima to prepare her for her wedding. And then he gave back a portion of the mahar to Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, and this is for you to go and prepare, you yourself and for your house, prospective house. Which father-in-law would take the mahar and give a chunk of it back to the man and say, go and use it to prepare? This is the behavior of the Holy Prophet with Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, then I went to prepare, I did what I could to prepare the house with very basic things, a rug, somewhere to sleep, some basic things for what we could cook with, basic items, the most basic things. And Salman went and prepared, and he said, I bought the things that the Prophet commanded me, and the Prophet agreed a time when we would do the zafaf, when Fatima would actually come to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They recited the ceremony, the nikah, it was completed, and they agreed a particular time when Amir would be ready to accept Fatima into the house. The Prophet, when the date was agreed, in the morning of that occasion, he says, this is the happiest day of my life. I have not been so happy since I was married to Khadija. This is the happiest day of my life. He says to Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says, who are you going to invite? Because it is mustahab in our tradition, in the sunnah of the Prophet, even in the books of fiqh, it is mustahab to do a walima, to do a feast on the day of the wedding. It is also mustahab to do a walima when you have a son, the firstborn, and it is mustahab to do a walima when you come back from Hajj. These are three feasts. It is mustahab to invite the people, your family, friends, to these kind of feasts. So the Prophet says to Ali, who will you invite? And Ali said, I will invite some of our friends, some of our family members, our companions. The Prophet says, go towards them and invite them. So when he says, he's describing, he says, I went to the mosque of the Prophet expecting a few of our companions, a few of them to be there. I would invite a few of them and then knock on a few doors and call some of our friends. So we'd have a small gathering of our friends. He says, I entered that day in the mosque and everybody was in the mosque. The whole of Medina turned up to that mosque. I stood, I saw it not possible that I invite this one and him standing next to him, I don't invite him. If I tell this one, not tell him, I'll be very much embarrassed. Yet I have food for only 40 men. I was only able to prepare food for 40 men. So I really did not know what to do. He said, I went to the place where the muadhin stands. I stood there and I said, Man ahab an yahdar walimat Fatima bint Muhammad, falyahdar indana. If whoever wants to attend the feast of Fatima Zahra, you must back towards the Prophet. I went back towards the house. My forehead was dripping with sweat. I was in a state. The Prophet saw me, says, La alayk, don't worry, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Bring me the food. See, this is the father-in-law. He says, I will serve it with my own hands. Bring every 10, 20 people together, I will give them. I will serve them. Which father-in-law in today's world would say to the son-in-law, give me the food, I will serve the food in the wedding of my daughter? Who would do that today? Some of them don't attend, some of them are not happy, some of them want so-and-so conditions, in this hotel, and this much mahar. But this is the Prophet saying, here's part of the mahar. I will gladly wed my daughter to you, and I will serve the food in your wedding. Which father-in-law behaves like this? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, we stood and the Prophet fed the people. He took some dates and took some butter and mixed it and gave it to the people. And the people would come and eat and come and eat and come and eat. By the barakah of the hand of the Prophet, it was as if the food was not even touched. And everybody that wanted to eat and wanted to come was there. The whole of Medina was there that day. This is the marriage of Amir al-Mu'mineen to Fatima al-Zahra. The behaviors and the particular sunan and description of how modest yet perfectly happy. It is said, the Prophet said that this day is such a blessed day. All of the people came out. They took part in the procession of Fatima al-Zahra to the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Everyone was smiling. It was done very nicely. There was poetry recited on that day. Things that, inshallah, all the modern day weddings we should aspire to behave in the same way with.
Ahsant, Haji Sajjad. It's very important, I think, that we learn from the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, and especially some of these important aspects that we sometimes have. Inshallah, it's not in our community, but sometimes a few issues are raised when it comes to marriage, and some questions are asked. So inshallah we can learn from the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Coming back to his, inshallah we will end with this, his bravery, Imam Ali's bravery and his strength, and the fact that whenever the Prophet would go to a battle or a war, and Imam Ali was with him, Imam Ali was the standard bearer. So this is noted in all history books, that Imam Ali alayhi salam was always the standard bearer of the Prophet in all the wars and battles that took place, Badr, Uhud, Khaybar, Ahzab, known as Khandaq, all the battles that took place while Imam Ali was there, he would be the standard bearer. The Battle of Badr, of course, before the marriage of Imam al-Hussein, we mentioned, before the marriage of Imam Ali alayhi salam, he killed half of those that were killed in the enemies, more than half. But I think one battle we can look at is maybe Ahzab, the Battle of Khandaq, and that was I think the fourth or fifth battle that took place, and it was when the Quraysh and all the other tribes combined, and that's why it's called the Ahzab. All the tribes, they combined to fight the Holy Prophet, or obviously another name is given Al-Khandaq. A trench was built around Medina for the protection of Medina, and the battle took place, and Ali came out once again as the hero of that battle, the Battle of Ahzab.
Insha'Allah, we might be able to touch on it immediately on the next show, because I think the time is going to...
I know, I was just about to say that we only have 3 or 4
minutes.
We'll give
a couple of background to the other kind of battles. The first battle that took place was in Badr. It was the wells, and the Prophet told the Muslims that your wealth has been confiscated by the Quraysh. When the Hijrah occurred, the Muslims left all their possessions, their homes, everything in Mecca. Abu Sufyan took all of their possessions and went to Sham to trade it. So he stole it and traded, took the money back from it. The Prophet was informed that the caravan of Abu Sufyan is coming back. You should go, Jibreel is informed, you should go and take back the wealth of the Muslims. So the Prophet sends a group of men to go and try to stop the caravan of Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan hears of it, informs the Quraysh, sends one of his servants, rips his clothes and bloodies his face to say the Muslims are attacking us. Abu Jahl commands an army, and so they meet in Badr, which is the wells, a distance from Medina. And the wells were protected by the Muslims, and the battle began. It is said 70 of the Qurayshis were killed. The narrators say either 34 or 35 or 36 were killed by Ali ibn Abi Talib, and they list their names. And this battle showed the bravery of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and he entered the battle with Hamza and Ubaidah ibn Abi al-Harith as representatives of the Prophet in the battle to start with. And the second battle was Uhud, again a battle outside Medina. This is important because the Battle of Khandaq took place right on the outskirts of Medina. So the second battle was Uhud, and this was a battle in which the Qurayshis themselves wanted to attack the Prophet. So not the Prophet wanting to attack, it was a defensive battle. The Qurayshis wanted to come out and fight the Holy Prophet. They thought that they had very much large numbers and they would be able to defeat the Prophet easily. They reached the outskirts of Medina. The Prophet came out with his men to meet them. And it was a very difficult battle for the Muslims because initially it went very well. They were able to defeat the leaders of the Qurayshis, and the men the Prophet had stationed on the hill. If you go modern day Uhud, Medina, you see there are mountains and some small hills around it. He stationed archers so that they would not be able to send cavalrymen behind the hills. And when they saw that the battle was going very well and the Qurayshis were fleeing, these men came down, unfortunately left their positions. And so Khalid ibn al-Walid, later on the sword of Islam, decides to come back from behind the Prophet and attack the Muslims. And the Muslims scattered because Abu Sufyan began to shout, Muhammad is being killed. It is said that everyone ran. Al-Abbas, who was the uncle of the Prophet, was there that day. He said, I saw all the Muslims leave. I had a loud voice. So as we were leaving, all of us left. I looked back and I saw a cloud. I saw some dust and men around it. When the dust settled a little bit, I saw Ali ibn Abi Talib moving around non-stop. And the Prophet behind him saying, to the left, to the right, ahead of you, watch for this one, commanding him. And Ali was the only one that remained with the Prophet. When I saw this, I began to shout, oh Muslims, Muhammad hasn't been killed, he's still alive, come back. And the Muslims began to come back. And that is the moment when Amir al-Mu'mineen broke his sword. When he was fighting so hard, his sword broke. And the Prophet took his sword and said, here you go. And this is when we hear that the sword Dhul Fiqar is actually the Prophet's sword given to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And we hear La Fata illa Ali, La Sayf illa Dhul Fiqar, because of the bravery of Amir al-Mu'mineen on that day. This was the second battle, the battle of Uhud. And the third battle was Al-Khandaq, or the battle of the Ahzab, the tribes mentioned in Al-Quran. Surah 33, Al-Ahzab, is detailing this incident. Inshallah, we can continue next time.
Ahsant, Haji Sajjad. I'd like to thank you for taking part in today's show. And inshallah we will see you next week inshallah when we will continue our discussion into the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam. Inshallah next week same time we will be back. Inshallah we will start with the bravery of Imam Ali alayhi salam, just to continue on tonight's topic, and the famous battle of Ahzab. And of course, inshallah, we will speak about Khaybar, the battle of Khaybar, inshallah, next week. And next week, inshallah, we will look at Imam Ali in Hadith and the Holy Quran, more importantly. Inshallah, next week, same time. Haji Sajjad, thank you for joining us, inshallah. Thank you for watching, inshallah. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, they are available on demand, ahlulbayt.tv/on demand. Inshallah, I will see you next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.